to destroy the potential of a young generation of Romani kids, to deliberately and willfully neglect the kind of realization of their potential, depriving Romani people of a next generation of people who could be artists, physicists, who could be doctors, could be civil rights activists, could be writers. We regarded this as not just an abuse of human rights, but actually cultural vandalism. My name is Bernard Rourke. I'm an Irish citizen, resident here in Budapest for the past 20 years, and I work for the European Roma Rights Centre as an advocacy officer.
I'm Nadir Rejepi, coming from Macedonia. I am also Roma, by Roma origin. I joined REF in 2016 as a director.
I would say the situation is dire at the moment. We've reached a type of paradox where the level of international recognition of the plight of the Roma is higher than ever before, but the actual situation on the ground among Roma communities is one of impoverishment and continued exclusion.
We know that only 1% of Roma children are reaching the tertiary level of education. 10 to 15% are moving to secondary level of education, but mostly the biggest dropouts are in the primary education. 40 to 60% are getting out of the school. And that means that many generations are created or constructed as useless citizens because they cannot get normal jobs. They depend on the very physical, simple, jobs on the agree market, and they are dependent on the social support.
I wouldn't call it a conservative government, I would call it an extreme right government. Members of this government and prominent supporters of this government have engaged in overtly racist, Islamophobic, anti-refugee propaganda. They have stigmatized minority populations. The Prime Minister and others have stated that we've had Roma here for 500 years. If we can't integrate them, how would we be expected to integrate Muslim hordes from the Middle East and Africa? This is the type of racist language used by a Prime Minister, not a street corner neo-fascist thug. The European Union has taken infringement proceedings against Hungary because old racist habits die hard. They tried to normalize and routinize educational systems whereby Romani and non-Romani children were educated separately, where people simply didn't care that Romani children didn't have equal opportunities. They can't run hate campaigns, racist propaganda campaigns, and not expect that it doesn't leave it corrodes the public sphere, public discourse becomes crude. If the government is using racist language, then the population will start to, they see this kind of discourse is validated. If the Prime Minister can say it, if prominent politicians, publicists, TV figures can use an abusive language about refugees, migrants, about Roma, Muslims and Jews, can use homophobic language, then this coarsens everyday common sense.
This government in 2011 has changed the Act for Education, where has decreased the compulsory age for Hungarian children from 18 to 16, which now means that around 50% of Roma youth is living at that age, the schooling environment. So they needed kind of attention, special attention in the schools, and that was the main justification. But the other side, they said that the not just Roma, but also other children who perform less should not, obstacle the other children who are more talented and more capable, which means that they were trying to nurture the talent, but also to accelerate the learning. But this is like legalizing the segregation, in fact, because this was the argument of the government, with the catch-up classes that they will improve, but in reality we see that there are no improvements.
There are three forms of segregation, if I was to simplify things. The first is where children are wrongfully diagnosed as having learning difficulties and sent to so-called special schools. The second is where there are schools actually built in huge Roma neighbourhoods, where the intake is entirely 100% Romani children. And then in other schools we've had what's called the Gypsy Annex, so-called separate spaces and places for Romani kids.
I mean, I was witnessing this kind of racism in the academic discourse during my master studies here in Hungary. There was a book in the Corvinus University who was teaching about minorities in this part of Europe, and there are problems around redrawing the borders within the history. When it comes to Roma, then you see all the prejudices and bias about describing the situation of Roma. There was one paragraph saying that the Roma children are mostly mentally ill and criminals because in Roma culture is allowed to have marriages or sexual intercourse between brothers and sisters. And this is very wrong. Hungarian Roma, by religion, are same, like a mainstream population. In the history, they had kind of stronger assimilative policies towards Roma, but when it comes to the values, Roma are still considered something not as normal Hungarian. They believe, the mainstream population, that Roma tradition is not in line with the Hungarian society.
From a starting point, I would argue that all children with mild disabilities should be integrated into mainstream schooling with the additional support they need for them to thrive in a mixed learning environment, and that is better for kids. When Romani children who have no learning disabilities are given a reduced curriculum, there's no challenge in the school. There's nothing. When you graduate from a special school, you're not going to get into a gymnasium. That's the end of it for you.
The custom, the tradition, the culture, even the language which was forbidden in time of Maria Teresa, because 90% of Roma in Hungary has lost, they don't speak Roma language. They change their names, they change their religion, but still they are not considered as a Hungarians.
People have exaggerated aspects of Romani culture. Indeed, some people, there are those that exoticize, infantilize, and there are others who racially denigrate, and it creates a notion of Roma as being somehow fundamentally different, when the basic truth is we have far more in common, Roma and non-Roma, than will ever separate or differentiate us. The kind of poisoned thinking that asserts Romani culture is so different, integration is impossible, is self-serving because it seeks to maintain a hierarchical. So they say, we're not racist, you're just different. The battle must be fought on every front, in the courts, in the schools, in the communities and neighbourhoods. The stupidity of racism must be challenged every single day.
So that is the ambition of the movement, and I hope that the next generation will be much more bringing people behind them, because movement without people cannot succeed.
separate can never be equal.